Josephine was just 8 years old when she discovered a secret about her mother and herself. Both were living with HIV. This was the year 2001, a very different time in the epidemic in Uganda.
Then it was, like a death sentence.
By that point, nearly 2 million Ugandans had died from AIDS-related illnesses. But this was also the moment when there was a new hope for people like Josephine and her mother, drugs that could turn HIV into something manageable. Hello, and welcome to Beyond, a podcast from the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. I'm your host, Eric Bond. On today's episode, meet Josephine Nabukenya. Josephine is the co-founder and director of a fledgling nonprofit in Uganda that provides a space where children living with a chronic disease can feel safe and just be children.
How are we feeling? Better. How are we feeling? Better. How are we feeling? Better.
Coming up, Josephine's dream. Stay with us. Josephine Nabukenya grew up in Uganda's capital city, Kampala. Her father taught physics at Makerere University. Her mother was a school teacher turned entrepreneur, opening a store selling kids' clothes. They were decidedly middle class.
Besides the times when I was sick, I think I was a happy child.
But the family was not spared tragedy. 2 of Josephine's sisters and a brother died in infancy. As a kid, Josephine was often sick, contracting pneumonia and tuberculosis multiple times.
I grew up in the middle of kids that had, passed on. So they called me a miracle child because I almost got each and every condition that they got, but I never passed on. I would always overcome it. So I received whatever I asked for at home. I was a spoiled kid.
Did you think there was something wrong with you?
No, I was very young. I wasn't thinking like there was anything wrong with me.
She didn't think anything was wrong with herself, but she knew something was wrong with her mother.
My mother was very sick. She was bedridden. Like part of her side, her body was paralyzed. She knew she was going to die.
The doctors didn't think she'd make it either. Josephine took care of her mother to nurse her the best an 8-year-old could. Then one day she found something her mother had written.
She had placed it under the pillow. So I think when she was coming out of the bedroom and probably maybe going to the sitting room, I think she forgot that, it was left there.
At this point, Josephine had no idea what was making her mother ill. But the letter contained an answer and a surprise about her own life.
She was living with HIV and I was living with HIV as well.
This was a revelation for Josephine. She'd had no idea that HIV was the reason she'd been sick so often.
And I felt sad because at school we were learning about HIV. So I had clues of what HIV is like. I knew it was incurable, there was no treatment. And there were signposts all over the school compound. HIV kills, blah, blah, blah. So all those statements that actually scare you about a certain condition.
She didn't understand it at the time, but the letter was actually her mother's last will and testament. But she couldn't talk to her mother about any of it.
Because she was very ill, I could not ask her questions. I just had to keep quiet. But then in my quietness, I wrote a poem.
At that moment, the poem was just for her, a way for a little girl to cope. But before long, it would have a big audience.
So, this poem was just bringing out what I knew about HIV, what I wanted, and the fact that I knew it was a bad disease, a death sentence.
By the turn of the new millennium, antiretroviral drugs, or ARVs, had been available in rich countries for a few years, but they were in extremely limited supply in Uganda back then. As the wife of a university lecturer, Josephine's mom had access to healthcare that was not available to most other Ugandans. So the doctors huddled and considered whether to try her mother on an emergency regimen of the drugs.
The doctors kind of struggled to make a decision to put her on ARVs because they thought she would actually die from the ARVs themselves instead of the ARVs saving her life. But they still made a decision to put her on ARVs.
The ARVs worked.
She responded to the treatment, and she's still alive up to now. It was a miracle. The doctor says that is one of the miracles he has ever seen.
So along with learning about your mother's HIV status, you also learned that you're living with HIV. Did you worry that you were going to die?
I was more worried about her because she was extremely ill.
Like in another circumstance, you would have been thinking about yourself, but you were so worried about her that you didn't even really have the space to worry about yourself. Is that kind of what I'm getting?
Yes, that is it.
Josephine says her father and other family members stepped in to take care of her and her siblings. That made a big difference after learning of her own diagnosis. But she was still at risk. There were no antiretroviral drugs available to her at this point. Doctors just treated her symptoms. As her mother recovered, Josephine enrolled in a psychosocial support group for children through the Muju Research Collaboration. Muju is a joint venture through Makerere University in Kampala and Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. The support group was funded by the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation, or EGPAF. Psychosocial support groups provide a space for children living with HIV to be with others who share their experience and to have a place where they don't feel different from other kids.
Another kind of support system where we are of the same status. Children that were going through what I was going through, and we would learn from what each one of us is going through.
And they had fun. They'd play drums, sing. One day a U.S. basketball team visited and gave the kids balls and other swag.
So in that day in the group, we had all of us had new capes, we had gloves, and we did an activity that day. We painted our hands, and we placed the painted hands all over the walls in the clinic. So it was such a beautiful day.
Josephine's mother bounced back, thanks to the emergency dose of ARVs. But when she returned to normal life, she gave up her store. Instead, she dedicated herself to being a peer educator, someone who shares her lived experience with others going through similar situations. Young Josephine would often tag along.
Whenever she would share personal experience, she would also have me alongside. So I would, in the end, also share my experience. Then it became a mother-daughter experience.
Others noticed this little girl talking so openly about her own experience with HIV. It even led to a very exclusive invitation. She was chosen to speak at a national event in front of Uganda's president.
I was excited as a child, but scared at the same time. You know, the person you've been seeing on TV is the president. Now you're going to see him, face to face. My father had to buy me a new white dress and stockings and shoes and like all those things to just make sure that I looked presentable and I was smart.
Josephine gets there and finds herself seated at a table with a beauty queen, Miss Uganda, who lent her a sweater when it got chilly. Then Josephine's name is called.
I was called on stage to share my story and share the poem. There were so many cameras, I think, broadcasting within the country, but out of the country. That one I remember very well. I wasn't so scared because I had done it several times. So I wasn't scared of the microphone or scared of speaking and all that.
And you read the poem that you wrote after you discovered your mother's will. Would you read an excerpt from that poem?
Okay, oh my God. It goes, HIV, HIV, HIV. HIV is a dangerous virus. HIV causes AIDS. Many children lost their parents because of AIDS. Many parents lost their children because of AIDS. Our beloved ones are dead because of AIDS. Oh, what a cumbersome disease it is. Ugandans, what should we do to fight AIDS? Our government, president, doctors, nurses, teachers, parents, and guardians, help us. We are dying. They stood up, they clapped their hands. Actually, that was like one of those first ovations that I got in my life where people stand up and clap their hands for me. So I knew I had done great. I knew I had shared the message home. To me, I was excited, like a little celebrity kid. I was just excited that I've spoken before so many people, before so many cameras, but above all, before the president of the country. Like I was with him face to face. I had a handshake with him, yeah.
Josephine was getting recognition, but she still wasn't able to get antiretroviral drugs in Uganda. During the same time period when Josephine had spoken in front of her president, in the United States, the George W. Bush administration was launching a major international aid program called PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. In 2004, the first beneficiary of PEPFAR was a man in Uganda who received ARVs through the program. Recognizing the importance of this new initiative, EGPAP asked Josephine to come to the U.S. Congress in 2005 to speak out for children. Children have their own needs when it comes to ARV formulations and dosages, and she was also asked to speak out for wide distribution of ARVs beyond urban centers like Kampala. Ending pediatric HIV means providing pregnant women living with HIV with ARVs so that children like Josephine can be born HIV-free. Josephine was 12 years old at this time. Tell me about getting that invitation.
I was home doing housework. I remember it had rained, so I was mopping the veranda at home. My mother came back from work, and then she told me, I have good news for you. I was happy because it meant boarding a plane, which was going to be my first experience to be on the plane. So I was just looking forward to the D-Day of boarding the plane and seeing what America looks like.
What was your impression as a child driving into Washington, D.C.?
I loved the roads. They were so smooth, no potholes. In my country, when you get into the car, you can easily put the windows down. And then I come to the US and we get into the car and windows and everything has to be up, and then air conditioning. That kind of like shocked me because I wasn't used to that environment. I went to the zoo first time, so I was shocked. I thought Western countries don't have animals, apart from like the pet animals.
The speech goes well, and also at that event, Josephine meets Jake Glazer, Elizabeth Glazer's son, who is living with HIV and whose life was saved through ARV intervention.
When we're in Africa, we think it's only an African issue. We think there is no white person who is living with HIV until you actually come and find them in their countries. Yeah.
Speaking to the U.S. Congress was a big deal, and it opened up new opportunities for Josephine. But there was another side to her growing fame.
After that event, classmates got to know about my status, because then it was in the papers, and at school they would buy newspapers and have them like school library and all that. That's when I faced some kind of stigma. Is it true that actually you're HIV positive? Like, they wrote your story in the newspapers and all this. Is it true, or you're just making money? People think when you share your story, you're making money out of it. And they were talking about it, and I heard it, and I just could not stay in class. I had to go to the school nurse and lie that I was sick, and then they gave me permission, and then I left school. I never went back. So when I went to another school, the same thing happened. I was in the newspapers, and then I went to class, and the kids had the newspapers. I went back home and I told my mother, and my mother told me, if you change school, I'm not paying your school fees again. So I had no option but to learn to stand in the situation and get out of it the hard way.
The hard way being to stay in school, stay in the same class.
I remained in there. I didn't change friends. People don't talk forever. I had to face it that way, and I can't even lie to you that I felt low for like more than a month. No.
Josephine needed support, the kind of support that encompasses her mental, emotional, and social needs. And some of that support came from special camps named after the daughter of Elizabeth Glaser, Ariel, who died at age 7 from age-related illnesses. These Ariel camps were just what Josephine and kids like her needed. The kids came from all over Uganda.
So attending an area camp was an opportunity to sleep well. That is number one, because when you look at most of the children in Africa, I would say, especially those that are not coming in from the high class families, it's hard to find a child who sleeps alone. It's hard to find a child with one bedroom or with one bed. So attending the camp was an opportunity for us children to actually have those kind of bedding set up. It was an opportunity for us to eat a buffet from Monday until the last day, and then you have a buffet like lunch and dinner. So it was time to eat chicken, as many pieces as you want. It was time to actually meet celebrities. I mean, they would bring musicians to us. You would just wake up and it's the musicians that are serving you breakfast, and you'd be like, what? Actually, I know this person from TV, and actually, now seeing them serving you breakfast. Yeah, it was a moment to have fun and a moment to be a child as well, because we had a lot of time to play, which sometimes is overlooked as children. We had a child at one point who said they didn't want to go back home because the only time they had to be a child was at the camp, because this child was telling us that she stays with her grandmother who is very old, so she does all the housework at home. So she definitely has no time to go and play. She has no time to hang out with her fellow children. So camp was an opportunity for us to be children.
Hearing how other kids live at home made Josephine realize how lucky she had been to have supportive parents in a middle-class family. It also made her think about how these kids could use even more support.
Many children were coming from families where they were being discriminated. And those are things that I only heard of when I went to the area camps. Stigma and discrimination is so real in the HIV space. And I always tell people that I can handle stigma from external people. Like, I can go to a school and people stigmatize me and probably handle it. I can be in a community and be like, people are stigmatizing, and probably I can, forge a way to go through it. But it's different. It hits different when it's coming from your very own household, because you spend a lot of time at home. Morning, throughout the day, evening. So you find that even up to now, we still have families where children, because they're living with HIV, they have their own plate, they have their own cup. You find like there is this grandmother or grandfather, they have like 5 grandchildren, and out of the 5, only 1 grandchild is living with HIV. You find that the 4 grandchildren can eat from the same, plate, but this one grandchild who is living with HIV has a separate plate. So that kind of discrimination is hard to take in, hard to deal with, and it causes so many issues, including suicidal tendencies and low self-esteem and issues with accepting your status. It just disorganizes someone when they are growing up from a family where it is actually discriminating them.
As Josephine moved towards adulthood, she became an ambassador for EGPAF and worked at the Ariel camps. Then she went to university and got a degree in social work. Now an adult, she wanted to create a Ugandan-led organization that could provide the kind of fun and support she'd had at the Ariel camps.
So throughout my childhood, I was a beneficiary from very many different organizations. And different people that worked in those organizations, played a very big role in my life. They didn't just provide to me as staff in those organizations, but they provided to me as mothers, they provided to me as fathers, they provided to me as counselors, as best friends, people that I could always run to and cry to and, get advice from. And that kind of touched me, and I wanted to replicate that kind of love and support to other people in my life.
So she created her own organization. It's called the Miles of Smiles Foundation, and it replicates the kinds of programs she had had at Ariel clubs and Ariel camps. As international funding shifts, it's more important than ever that local organizations like Miles of Smiles are there to provide continuity within communities.
So starting Miles of Smiles was to broaden the dream I had of reaching out to children, adolescents, and young people living with HIV, but also those that are living with other chronic illnesses.
Miles of Smiles now works with kids living with other conditions like diabetes and sickle cell disease.
When you look at the HIV space, there is a lot of advocacy, a lot of attention. But when you look at kids that have sickle cells, they're going through so much in life and they're not getting the attention they need. They don't have things like peer support groups at their health facility. They are so isolated. There is so much that they're going. When you look at kids that are injecting themselves, those that are living with diabetes, they're going through a lot and they don't have this support system to, support them.
These kids also face stigma at home, she says.
They've not felt any bit of love. So when they come to the camp, they feel loved. They get a chance to play like any other child because at their home, they are doing all the housework. Some of them are coming from child-headed families. These are the same things that we used to talk about during the area camps.
Josephine used to tag along with her mother as she told people about her lived experience. Now Miles of Smiles is doing the same thing on a larger scale with staff members who know too well what it's like to have HIV or another disease.
And that is very nice because then people are not just working out of professionalism, but they're working on things that personally they've gone through, personally they've been affected by those things. So the dedication, the passion that they have towards what they're doing is not comparable to anything else in the world.
Better. How are we feeling? 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 Better.
So Josephine, you said earlier that it's important for kids to be able to dream. Are you living your dream?
Am I living my dream? That's a good one. I am living my dream, but I can't say that I have fulfilled my dream. Yeah. So each day that passes, I find more reason. I find more ways of making this dream more real, of expanding the dream, of improving the dream. So I'm living the dream, yes. Like there are so many things that I wanted 5 years back that I have right now, including establishing Miles of Smiles. It was a dream that has come from ideation to now it being impacting lives, saving lives, and reaching out to more children. I would say I'm living the dream, but of course there are more ways of making sure that the dream is expanded, the dream is reaching out to more people, and also that the dream is sustainable so that it is not a dream that will disappear, 2 years from now. So that is why I say I'm living my dream, but definitely there is a lot to do to make sure that the dream is there forever and ever to benefit more people, more children, more adolescents, and more young people living with chronic illnesses.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Beyond, a podcast from the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. Find out more about Josephine Nabukenya and about HIV in Uganda at pedaids.org. If you liked what you heard, please leave a 5-star review and tell us what you think of the show. And make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app to never miss an episode. Many thanks to associate producer Madeline Morris. We had editing help from Dan Bobkoff at Rhyme Media. I'm Eric Bond. Join me next week for a conversation with Ashley Rose Murphy, who became a voice for her generation living with HIV in Canada.
My life would be so much different had I not had HIV. I would not have the opportunities I have. I would not have the family I have. I wouldn't have the education I have.